Hello, this is Tom Chambers for Pokersavvy.com. This is video 5 in the 5-video PLO Fundamentals series. So it is the final video in the series, and it is also my final video for Pokersavvy. Um, just wanted to say briefly that I've enjoyed the year and a half or so that I've spent making videos here. I've made somewhere in the neighborhood of 35, I think, total. And I hope you guys have gotten a lot out of them, and that you feel like you've gotten your money's worth, etc. And just want to, I guess, thank all of you who have watched some or many of those videos for taking the time. And like I said, I hope that it has helped you. Okay, board texture. There are three different components that you can use when you study board texture, and these three should look familiar for those of you who have seen earlier videos in the series. This sort of combination of these three things comes up as the three components of a lot of aspects of looking at PLO. The three components of a starting hand, and the three components that we look at when we look at hand-board interaction, and obviously, therefore, we're also going to be looking at it when we look at board texture individually. In the context of today's lesson, what we're talking about are, on any given flop, what are the connectedness possibilities, what are the possible straight draws, and well, that's basically it. Straight draws, backdoor straight draws, wraps, open enders, etc. What are all of those possibilities? Suitedness, which is a pretty simple one. It's only going to get one slide later in this presentation. It's extremely important, obviously, to understand the difference between rainbow boards and suited boards, how they play, the equities involved, and so forth. But just in terms of evaluating board texture, it's not that complicated. Connectedness is fairly complicated, as we'll see. There's a bunch of different types of board textures in terms of sort of what straight draws are possible. There's quite a few categories, 7 different straight free board categories, 9 different boards, types of boards where straight is possible. Suitedness, you got rainbow boards, suited boards, monotone boards, and the main thing to study there is the effect on equities, the sort of the different ways that hand ranges interact with those boards when they can have a different set of combo draws and so on. So we'll definitely talk about the impact of suitedness on board texture, the differences in suited and rainbow boards and so on. But it's not a major focus just because of putting together board texture categories, just because it's relatively simple. The rank categories, the sort of impact of rank or high card strength, whatever you want to call it, having 2 Broadway cards versus having 2 middle cards and so forth, is also obviously an important aspect of reading board texture. And if you think about things in terms of the hand flop interaction material from chapter 3, really looking at sort of component by component, what is my hand strength in order to put together a picture of what your overall hand strength is. In PLO particularly, it's a game where there's a lot of cumulative equity. There's a lot of situations where you get your hand value by adding up value from a bunch of different places, and so there are going to be hands that have sort of are medium quality with respect to all of these things. You flopped, bottom 2 pair, a nut open ender, and flush draw, and that taking some value from each of those 3 components and adding them together in order to put yourself in a spot where you're generally doing well against just about any specific hand an opponent could have. Against top set, you've got all the draws. Against similar draws, you've got the pairs that give you extra value, and so on. We've talked about this in a few different places. So part of being able to look at a hand flop interaction combination, or just look and see you flopped something, to express it more plainly. I've got this hand. This is the flop. I'm trying to figure out what my hand strength is. A lot of times you're going to be trying to draw on these multiple components, and one of the things I try to teach my students is to think in those terms, to look at the board and say, what are the connectedness possibilities? What straight draws do I have? How do I define the board in terms of suitedness? Is it rainbow? Is it suited? Is it monotone? And then do I have a flush draw, backdoor flush draw, flush, whatever? What is the rank character of the board? Is this a board that's going to make it more or less likely that sets are in people's ranges? Is this a board that's going to create a lot of pair plus draw possibilities and so on? Or is this a sort of, and then on top of that, sorry, I got a little waylaid. Um, on top of that, then what is my value in sort of absolute terms in this category? If it's a board where it can be important to have, where an overpair is going to have some value. Do I have aces in this situation? Do I have aces in a gut shot on a board where there aren't very many sets? That sort of a thing. And so you're always creating a picture of these three components, both in terms of what the possibilities are and in terms of what your actual hand value is, and to take that process and look at a board, look at a situation, and say, this is what I have. Break it up into these pieces, and then put it together to get a picture of the whole thing. It sort of ensures that you don't miss things. I think is probably the easiest way to justify it. Anyway, this presentation will cover how to categorize flops in terms of these components. Particularly, we're going to be looking at connectedness, because it is of the three of them, it's the one that's best suited to the kind of analysis that I'm doing here, the categorization stuff. Suitedness is relatively simple. There's only three possibilities, and if you're just looking in terms of trying to categorize flops, put together sort of a system for understanding how different boards play differently from each other, that aspect of it is pretty basic. Some boards are going to have a certain type of straight draws available, and they're going to be rainbow. Some are going to be suited. Some are going to be monotone, and there's not a whole lot of time that has to be spent even to categorizing those flops in that way. There is a lot of time that has to be spent studying equities and differences between the frequency that people will hit the board in different ways and so on. So the stuff that was in lessons 3 and 4. But to move on to this next slide here. Here we've got the 7 different types of straight free boards, and I guess the point I'm making about suitedness is simply that this list will take a little bit of time to look at, and then also looking at the different wrap possibilities that are out there on each of these boards will take a little bit of time to look at. We can then add on to that the fact that sometimes one of these boards will be rainbow, sometimes it'll be suited, sometimes it'll be monotone, and the straight draws won't mean very much at all. And then sort of based on understanding of stuff from lessons 3 and 4, would have a better picture of what the equity matchups are and so forth. Okay, so here are the 7 different types of straight free boards. These are boards where the flop comes. It is not possible for a straight to be out there. In other words, the nuts is top set on these boards, with the rare exception of the cases where they're monotone. But in the just looking at connectedness, with respect to connectedness, there's no possible straight. A set is basically the nuts in all of these cases. These are the 7 possibilities. There are 4 boards total. I'm not going to name all the boards in all these cases, but there's 4 boards total that have no straight draws at all. 3 king high boards, king 8-2, king 7-2, king 8-3, and 1 queen high board, queen 7-2. It turns out, in sort of overall, king and queen high boards are the ones that are most likely to end up at the river without a possible straight. So there are a handful of ace high boards. Board like ace queen 9-6-4 is a board where there's no the board isn't paired, but the top set is the nuts on the river. There's quite a few, relatively speaking, compared to the number of ace high boards. There's quite a few king and queen high boards that fall into that category. There are no jack or lower high boards. In other words, top set of jacks will never be the nuts on the river. You can have jacks full be the effective nuts. Jack high board where the board's paired, and pocket jacks is losing only to quads. And of course you can have quad jacks. So pocket jacks can be the nuts on a rare board, but you will much more often have sets of kings and queens still be the nuts on the river compared with sets of aces, and certainly sets of jacks and lower will never be the nuts on the river. Anyway, there are there's a handful of these boards here that have 3 gut shot possibilities, and this is category 2. Basically, these are boards where there's no possible open-ender. They are usually created in one of 2 ways. There's the example we see here: ace king 7, ace queen 7, ace jack 7. Ace jack 7 doesn't fall into that. Ace jack 6 does, because the jack and the 6 don't work together. You end up with these either two Broadway, ace and another Broadway card, or an ace and another wheel card. And then a disconnected card off to the side, and then you have these three gut shots as shown here. Queen Jack, Queen 10, Jack 10 in this case are the three gut shots on Ace King 7. Another example of this is boards that have three gaps between two cards that are somewhat nearly, they're connected to each other but barely, and then there's one dangler card. So King 9-2 and Queen 8-2 are examples of this, where it's the three inside cards, not because we run into the top of the deck, but because there's just the three inside cards that you need all three of them to make a straight. So you need to have a specific 2 in your hand and catch a specific 1. There's your gut shot. You can also make this category 3 boards are boards where you take the 3 gut shots and basically put together 2 different 3 gut shot boards that are independent of each other. So you got Ace King 2, where you've got the Ace King combination and the Ace 2 combination, creating 3 gut shots each. Queen Jack, Queen 10, Jack 10, 5-4, 5-3, 4-3. And these always come in triplets. These cases, these boards where there's only gut shot possibilities. That's just how it works. There's only so many possibilities in the deck, basically. We're going to look at 4, 6, and 7 next, and then pull back to number 5, because number 5 is kind of a weird hybrid case. But numbers 4, 6, and 7 are the cases where there is 1 possible open-ender, 2 possible open-enders, and 3 possible open-enders. So going from least to most connected, as this whole list is doing. And in each of these cases, those open-enders come with a certain number of gut shots that sort of are always there with them, and become really important when you're looking at a board in terms of Hold'em. Obviously, you care about gut shots a little bit because they're involved in floating, and sometimes you'll be light semi-bluffing, or you'll have overcards in a gut shot, and it'll be worth more than just a standard gut shot. But where they really become important in PLO is that it's these gut shots with the open-ender in 3-card combinations, and sometimes in 4-card combinations, that form the big wraps. And so you see, as we'll talk in more detail about wraps in a minute, but you see this example here, Jack 8-2, where the open-ender is 10-9. In a Hold'em case, you'd look at that board and say the draw is 10-9. That's the straight draw. If it's a rainbow board, that's a very, not very many draw possibilities. The only real draw is the one open-ender 10-9. And you would be aware of the gut shots, but it's not as important. Here, you've got to think about, number 1, think about the gut shots, be aware that they're there, and then also how they're constructed, and so how they can work with the 10-9 combination in order to form wraps. So you look at the 10-9, and you have 2 cards in your hand to make an open-ender that are drawing to 2 cards, drawing to a queen or to a 7 in order to complete the draw. Now, the ways that you sort of switch those cards around in order to create gut shots that are drawing to a different card is you can basically take the 10 and either remove the 9, just take the 10 from the open-ender, and either add the queen, which is the high card, or you can add the 7, which is the low card. And then you can do the same thing with the 9. You can add the queen and make one of the cards that this open-ender is drawing to, and then one of the cards that's one of the cards within it, and then do the same thing on the other end. And these are the 4 gut shots. You've got the 2 nut gut shots on the top that are using the top card and drawing to one of the inside cards for a nut straight, and then you've got the reverse happening on the bottom, 10-7, 9-7, drawing to the 10 or the 9 in order to make a jack high straight on a board where a queen high straight is possible. So in order to make the second nuts, and in order to make wraps out of these situations, you take the open-ender and then you tack on one or the other card. And so if you have 10-9, you tack on the queen, then what you end up having is 10-9 plus queen 10 plus queen 9 as your 3 2-card combinations that have a chance to make a straight. You have some blockers in your own hand, and so that 8-out open-ender plus 4-out gut shot plus 4-out gut shot actually ends up, instead of being 16 outs, it ends up only being 13 because you have a queen, a 10, and 9 in your hand, which are 3 of your own outs. Anyway, that's how you form one example of how you form a wrap. I'm not going to do this with all of them. Some of them are more complicated than that, obviously. But I guess the message here is to realize that these board textures are not only defined by what the one open-ender possibilities is, but by what wrap possibilities the combination of the open-ender and gut shot create. So moving on to number 6, like I said, we're going to come back to number 5. I'm going to skip over it for just a second. Moving on to number 6, 2 open-enders and 5 gut shots. Basically what's going on here is you have a board that is generally it's boards that are single gappers. There are some weird cases that happen on the perimeter of the deck, but when you're inside, when you're looking at Jack high, 10 high, 8 high, whatever boards, Jack 9x, 10 8x, 9 7x, these are the boards that have two possible open enders, the boards with a single gap in them. And a fourth and an extra card that's disconnected. There's a few other ways it can happen, as I said, but that's one easy tool to recognize boards where there's two possible open enders. So here we have them, Queen 10 and 10 8, and then the gut shots. There's the two that go with the cards. The card that the Queen 10 is drawing to on top. Here's the two that go with the card that 10 8 is drawing to on the bottom. And then there's also one that you can build from the two open enders, taking the top and the bottom card and drawing to this middle card, the 10. So there's actually quite a few boards that fall into this category, and they all fit the same pattern. The wraps that go with them all fit the same pattern. There's going to be, as we look at the next slides, we're going to look at what those different wrap possibilities are. In the book, and I believe actually in some of the sample material, I think I've got the charts, this chart in the sample material. Got a chart where I basically have category by category have all of the different possibilities listed. So list of all the flops and then all the draws that come with them, and they really do all fit this pattern. Every board texture has its own set of, every one of these categories has its own set of possible draws, and they all line up. There's some symmetry in there that's if you look at stuff like this the way that I do, that is pretty cool. And even if you're not so poker nerdy about it, definitely some lessons you can pick up, realizing that these same types of situations will repeat themselves over and over again, and understanding how different wraps, the relative value of different wraps based on the total set of possibilities that are out there. And we'll get into that again a little bit more later when we're looking at the wraps. The seventh category here, you've got 3 open enders and 6 gut shots, and again you've got the same sort of pattern. You've got King Queen, Queen 9 9 8. These are the the nut open ender, the middle open ender, and then the under open ender, where you're drawing to this one's drawing, the Queen 9 one is drawing to 4 nut cards and 4 second nut cards. This is drawn to 4 nut cards and 4 third nut cards, and this is all nut outs, the King Queen one. You can take that King Queen and the top card it's drawn to, Ace King, Ace Queen. Take the 9 8 and the bottom card it's drawn to, 9 7 8 7. And then you can do the same thing we did up here and take for each of these two pairs. You take the King 9, draw to the Queen, take the Queen 8, draw to the 9. So anyway, that's how these gut shots and open enders interact with each other. I said we'd pull back and look at number 5. 1 open ender and 7 gut shots. These are a handful of boards. There's actually only 12 total, where you take one of these 3 gut shot combinations and one of these 1 open ender combinations, and you stick them together. So it's all 3 cards working together. There's a few cases of that fall into number 6 and 7 where all 3 cards are involved as well. Queen 9 6 is an example down here. That is one of these 3 open ender boards where all 3 cards are working together, and there's a double gut shot involved. That last sentence is parenthetical. If you didn't catch it, don't worry about it. Moving up here, back to number 5, 1 open ender, 7 gut shots. So what we've done is we've taken this 3 gut shot board, Ace 10x, and we've taken one of these 1 open ender, 4 gut shot combinations, the 10 7x, and put them together. And so you have this open ender, 9 8, and then you have the 4 gut shots that go with that, Jack 9, Jack 8, 9 6, 8 6, and then you also have the 3 gut shots that are happening at this top end. There's actually 2 different ways that these boards can break out, and those 12 that I mentioned actually fall into 2 groups of 6 based on whether the open ender is at the top or the 3 card combinations at the top. So Ace 10 7 is an example of a board where the King Queen Jack is the sort of the 3 card combination at the top is the nut draw, and then there's some non-nut stuff happening around the 9 8. You can invert this board and make it Ace 8 5, and it actually has the same characteristics, except now the open ender is on the top, and so the nuttiness of the different draws changes, but the sort of raw character of what different possibilities there are, these same 1 open ender, same 7 gut shots, same numbers of outs for all the different wraps are all there. All right. I realize that this is potentially a bit overwhelming. I hope it's laid out in such a way that you can sort of sit back and look at the PowerPoint on your own and sort of realize the things that you missed through the discussion. It's not massively important to have all this stuff memorized, but to the extent that you're able to get comfortable with it and sort of be able to see the board in terms of the straight draw possibilities, instead of just seeing there's a jack and an 8 on the board, but seeing that means that there's one open ender and these gut shots and the wraps that come with it and so forth. That's the point that this lesson is trying to get you to. All right. So here's the main wrap possibilities. There's a few different ways the definitions you could use for a wrap. I've heard people say that 9-out draws shouldn't be called wraps because they're not big draws. For the purposes of my material for this video, I'm going to use the word wrap to describe any case where the straight draw uses more than 2 cards. So any 2-card straight draw that you can also have in Hold'em, that's a Hold'em straight draw. Any 3-card or 4-card straight draw, that's an Omaha straight draw that is only available in Omaha of these two games that are obviously very closely related to each other. So any time that we're using at least 3 cards from our hand, we're going to call it a wrap, just for simple definition. Introducing this notation that actually got mentioned in the first, in the equity video, and I just realized that there's a typo here. This should say X. Let's see if I can actually change it in the video. Wow, fantastic. Notation equals XYZ, X nut outs, Y second nut outs, and Z third nut outs. I used this in the fourth the equity video with the 1300 example. So we're going to look here at looking back at these different 7 categories and looking at what wrap possibilities exist on these boards. 4 of them are pretty easy, and they're listed here in this category, the easy boards. Obviously, King 8-2 has no possible draws. That's the easiest. That's about as easy as it gets. Ace King 7, which had those 3 gut shots, has one 9-out wrap that you can build from putting the 3 gut shots together. It's a 3-card combination, Queen Jack 10 with any side card. Obviously, sometimes that side card will give you a pair. Sometimes you'll have sometimes you'll have flush draws with it. Whatever. There are some cases where that side card will give you extra backdoor straight draws. If you had Queen Jack 10 8 here, that would be better than having Queen Jack 10 2, because you could go running 9-6. But we're not getting into backdoor draws today. Again, that's a parenthetical statement. If you didn't catch it, don't worry about it. Let's just focus in on the 900 wrap. So this board, Ace King 7, and all of the boards like it that have 3 possible gut shots have one possible 900. Ace King 2, the boards that have 2 900s are pretty straightforward. Obviously, you're taking those 2 sets of 3 gut shots that are independent from each other, and then you have these 2 different possible draws. I'm going to add here that there are 2 boards that fall into this category up here, the 6 gut shot boards, that do not fit this, and they are Ace Jack 7 and Ace 8 4. What happens there is that the 2 9 wraps overlap with each other, and they're the only 2 boards that fall into that category. They're just unique, and if you want to play around with writing that board down and seeing what the possibilities are after the video, that's obviously something that you could do, but I'm not going to spend any more time on it. It's just one weird outlier case that happens within this list. Then we've got the final group. This is the first category where we have some real wraps. I mean, the 9-out wraps are effectively, they're as strong as an open ender. The equities are obviously similar. It's just one extra out. When you look at a 13-out wrap, then obviously you're getting into territory where you're in range equity-wise against the set, only a 60-40. You're often in really good shape against other made hands, where you don't have to fade as much of a redraw. It can be as close as 50-50, and you're really in this. This is a true Omaha draw in the sense that it's a draw the strength of which is not available in Hold'em. And on each of these boards with one open ender, there are 2 different 13 wraps. One nut 13 wrap that you get by taking the middle. The open ender cards 10-9 and adding on the top card, which gives you those nut gut shots. Again, if I'm going to flip back to the previous slide, here are the 2 nut gut shots combined with the 10-9 Queen 10-9 wrap. Similarly, here's the non-nut gut shots combined with the 10-9, gives you the 10-9-7 wrap, which turns out to have 7 nut outs. It's the 7s and the queens. Are nut outs, and then the 10s and 9s are non-nut outs. So that's the two possible wraps on this board, and then you can string them all together. And basically, by stringing them all together, all you do is block yourself once. You cannot create on this board anything bigger than a 13 wrap. So if you're holding Queen 10 9 7 on this board and it feels like you've got a big wrap, but you recognize that this is one of those boards that only has one open-ender possibility, you should recognize right away that your quote-unquote big wrap is just a 12-out draw. You cannot have bigger than a 13-out wrap on one of these boards where there's only one open-ender. The only way you can build bigger than a 13 wrap, a 16, 17, or 20 wrap, is if you have two different open-enders involved and overlapping in your hand. And we'll get to those examples in a minute. All right, so take a pause for a second. Just look this slide over and recognize that these are, I guess what the point that I want to make is that these are the only possibilities on these boards. These are the drier boards, the boards that are less connected, and there really aren't that many straight draw possibilities on those boards. And even in the case where there's there's a wrap possibility, there's really only these two possibilities, and then they overlap in this one, and that's it. So this is actually, in this territory, you could actually memorize everything. And whether you'd actually want to spend the time doing it, who knows if it's really worth having everything completely memorized. But you could actually do it. You could look at the board, and I could give you 10-7-2, which is a board that's similar to this Jack 8-2. It's got one open-ender, and ask you to write out, quote-unquote, all the wraps. And you could do it just having to write down three things. And so it's at least, in theory, it's pretty simple. The next set, it's not so simple. These boards that have more open-ender possibilities have quite a few more possible draws, and we're looking now at the easier half of them, which is the 3-card wraps. When we start looking at how these 3-card wraps overlap to create 4-card wraps, it gets pretty messy, and we're not going to do it. I'm not going to do it comprehensively in this video, although we're going to look for a second at a couple of interesting 4-card wraps. But even here, when we're looking at 3-card wraps, clearly there's more in each case than there were on the previous slide. There were a total of there were, what was it, 1 on each, 1, 2, and 2, and there's also, and I'll back up just for a second. If you look at this board, there's only 4 cards that make a straight possible on this board. It's the 4 cards that are in this wrap, Queen 10 9 7, and that's the reason why you can't have a big 4-card wrap, because if you use all four of those cards, you're not drawing to anything outside of the 4 in your hand, and so you can only have 12 outs. On these complicated boards, you're going to have a wider range of 3-out wrap possibilities. So I already said once that these Ace 10 7 and Ace 8 5, these boards, I call them hybrid boards, where you've got an open-ender and a 3 gut shot combination. You can create a 9 wrap, just like we could with this Ace King 2, Ace Queen 2, those boards. Ace Queen 6, Ace King 6, and so on, those boards that had that one open-ender, that one 9-out wrap. Sorry, I've just said 3 or 4 things that could easily have confused you, so ignore the last 30 seconds, and I'll do it again. Ace 10 7, this board here, the Ace 10 2-card combination has this 9-out wrap. There were a bunch of cases both on those boards that have one of these 9-out wraps, like Ace King 6, and the boards that have 2, like Ace 10 2, of 9-0-0 wraps, and we see the exact same things going on here. It's the exact same. Take those 3 cards in between, the 3 cards that are sort of shared by the gut shots, King Queen, King Jack, and Queen Jack, turn them into a 9-out wrap. You also can take this 2-card combination here that has an open-ender, single open-ender, and do the high wrap and the low wrap, but the nuttiness of it changes because it's on the bottom, and the Jack is no longer a nut out, which it would be on 10-7-2. The Jack is a nut out, but here it makes a higher straight possible. So it changes a little bit. And then you see the Ace 8 5, where now it's the 3 wrap that would normally be a nut wrap, but because the 8's there is a non-nut wrap. And then you have 9-7-6 and 7-6-4, which are the same sort of over wrap, under wrap around this 8-5 combination. So anyway, that's the 3-card wrap possibilities on those weird hybrid boards that have the sort of the three wrap and the open-ender jammed together. Then you've got these 2 open-ender boards, which make one nut 13 wrap possible, and that's taking the sort of the nut open ender and adding the nut gut shot card, so all the outs are to the nuts. You've got one 17 out wrap that uses the two open enders together, queen 10 and 8, but it has 6 non-nut outs. And then you've got the one under 13 wrap, 10 8 7, which uses the bottom open ender and the bottom gut shot card and only has 3 nut outs. It's the 3 7s, and the other all of the other 10 outs are non-nut, and so it's obviously a wrap with significant weakness. But again, I guess to try to turn this from just looking at a bunch of numbers to thinking in practical terms about looking at a board and reading it, when you see a board that has a single gap like this, Jack 9-2, 10-8-2, etc., and the third card is disconnected, doesn't interact with the other two, you're going to have 3 main wrap possibilities. One of them is the big wrap, the 17 wrap. It's in the middle and has quite a few nut outs but some non-nut outs. One of them is the high 13 wrap. That's all nut outs, and so you compare these two boards. Look at these boards. These two wraps are both pretty strong for slightly different reasons. Queen 10-8 has more outs. Queen 10 has all nut outs and actually dominates Queen 10-8. So you get in, the rare case where it's King Queen Jack 10 versus Queen Jack 10-8 on this board, and the King Queen Jack 10 has this hand crushed because it's got its outs either duplicated or dominated, with just one exception, the 7 being a live extra out for the Queen 10-8. But point being that both of these are strong, and you should be able to recognize that they both are there, and that anytime you have one or the other, that you should be aware that somebody else could have the other one. If I have King Queen or King Queen 10, I could be up against an opponent with Queen 10-8, and then ask the question, what impact does that have on equities? And then understand also that when you have either one of these, you could be up against somebody who's in a lot of trouble with this 10-8-7, and that if you're the one with 10-8-7 or you have an opponent with 10-8-7, it's important to recognize that hand is seriously damaged. It's a non-nut draw, and it's got a lot of different ways to be dominated, and so to see this hierarchy of these 3 wraps with 2 that are strong and 1 that's weak is important. Okay, moving on to Jack 10-2 boards. These are the boards that have, most of them are boards that are no gapper boards with a dangler. So Jack 10x, 10-9x, 9-8x, etc. There's also boards that are have a double gut shot in the middle and have 2 open enders on either side. So Queen 9-6 is an example where you've got Jack 10, 10-8, and 8-7. I certainly don't expect you to follow every word of this. If you really want to take notes and look at it on your own, that's certainly a way that you could follow a bit more of what I'm saying. But sometimes I'm just throwing out examples that you don't necessarily have to memorize. And I certainly wouldn't expect you to be able to pull the what these wraps are on Queen 9-6 from just looking at this video. It's not supposed to be like that. You can go into more depth, but not necessarily it's not necessarily important for us to do so today. Anyway, when you have these boards, and the majority of them fall into this group where you've got 2 cards that are 1 card apart. That have no gaps between them. So here's the 1 gapper, here's the no gapper. On the previous slide, up here, here's the 2 gapper. Here's the 1 gapper, here's the no gapper, and then up in here, and the 3 gut shot boards like King 9-2, some of the ones that aren't listed here, are the 3 gapper boards. And then, like I said, there's some weird stuff that happens at the top of the deck when you run into not being able to carry the ace-king combo over to get to use the 2 and 3 and so forth at the other. You can't roll over the deck. So there's some weirdness that happens there. But in the middle, you've got this pretty straight line where you've got the 3 gapper, 2 gapper, 1 gapper, no gapper. Okay, moving back to where we were. These are the different wrap possibilities on Jack 10-2, and there are 4 different main possible 3-card wraps. There's the nut 13 out wrap, just like we had in this case. There's the 17 out wrap that is very similar to this one. And there's also this really weak 13 out wrap at the bottom. But you've also got this extra 17 wrap that is dominated by the other 17 wrap. Is obviously doing really well against the set. If you remember, the equity matchups that we looked at in lesson 4. If a set is up against the 17 wrap, it doesn't care which 17 wrap it's up against. It matters if it's got a gut shot on the side or some other kind of backdoor straight outs or whatever. But if it's just a pure set versus 17 wrap, the non-nut 17 wrap is just as good as the nuttier 17 wrap. Obviously, draw versus draw, these matter. But this 17 wrap that has some nutness weaknesses is still a pretty strong hand, but it's definitely one that if you have it without any other backup, you don't have a pair, you don't have any backdoor flush draws, that's a hand that's potentially in trouble on a board like this, especially if it's a flush draw board. Jack 10-2 with a flush draw, you have bear queen 9-8. That's a fairly weak hand, and might look bigger than it is, and it's sort of the kind of hand that you have to play cautiously and try to find ways to represent stuff that you don't have in order to make it profitable, as opposed to just jamming and getting it in. Whereas with King Queen 9, Ace King Queen, you're particularly with the King Queen 9 wrap, your extra nutty outs makes your equity better against a range that includes other draws. Okay. Again, you're not going to be expected to memorize these, but just realize that when you've got one of these two connected card combinations, you've got the over nut wrap where you've got all 3 cards higher is only a 13 wrap. The under nut wrap where you've got all 3 cards lower is only a 13 wrap, and it's obviously really weak. Anytime you've got 2 over 1 under or 2 under 1 over, those are 17 wraps, and they're the sort of the thing that's really unique to PLO, the case where you can have a draw that's as strong as a set. You really need to truly wrap around, have cards on top and on the bottom in order to make that a possibility. Even here where you've got this nice 3-card draw, it's not wrapping around with a card on the bottom. In other words, you can't make bigger than a 13 wrap without having some of the cards in your hand on either side, as we did here with Queen 10-8 and as we do here with King 9-8 or King Queen 9 and Queen 9-8. Okay. Going to move on now and talk about the 4-card possibilities on these boards. I'm going to try to get through this quickly and possibly let some detail slip. Like I said here, there's several examples on all of these complicated boards. This is supposed to be a continuation of the previous slide, talking still about those 4 types of those complicated boards. Really 3 categories, these 2 being variations of the same thing, and then these 2 being different, the 2 open-ender and 3 open-ender boards. These are a handful of cases where you actually get extra outs as a result of using a 4th card. It's not this thing where you're just blocking yourself and losing an out. You actually are adding outs. And so here we take this Jack 9-8 3-card wrap, and we tack on a strong a nut gut shot card that adds extra outs. And so you've got Jack 9-8, and then it makes the Queen another 4 nut outs. Queen Jack 9-8 gives us that King that's an extra 4 non-nut outs. 4 nut outs. And it also takes the 3-card combination King Queen Jack, King Queen Jack, and when you tack on the one of the gut shot cards from the 10-7 combination, you add an extra 4 nut outs, and so you take that 9-0-0 and make it a 13-0-0. Same thing's going on here, but just sort of flipped because of the open ender is the non-nut thing here. It's the nut thing here. The gut shots combo is the nut thing here, and Ace 5 is the non-nut thing on this version of it. So those boards, they have the same wrap, same number of outs, but different nuttiness. Okay, Jack 9-2 actually is one of the cleanest boards of these complicated boards. If we look back at the previous slide, main wrap possibilities here, see these 3: King Queen 10, Queen 10-8, 10-8-7. That's pretty much all there is on Jack 9-2. There are a couple of ways that you can make a 4-card wrap by adding or use 4 cards, or have a wrap that has 4 cards and sort of modifies those wraps a little bit, but what it doesn't do is ever add extra outs. You can't create a 20 wrap on those boards, for example. You can't take those 13 wraps and really turn them into a bunch of other 17 wraps like we did up here by tacking on random gut shots that were available. Basically, you can take queen 10-8 and you can add the king and sort of combine the king queen 10 and queen 10-8 wrap. And you take that 17 wrap, you lose an out because you block yourself, but you turn it into an all nut wrap, which is why it's important. The 16-0-0 sort of huge nut wrap. And then you've got queen 10-8 7 on the bottom end, which all it does is take queen 10-8 and make it one nut out worse. It turns it into a 10-6-0. But there's not a whole lot of other possibilities, and you actually, if you just look at those, the ones that we've looked at so far, you've pretty much seen it all. You have in terms of draws that have more than 13 outs, you've seen it all. Jack 10-2 board, I'm skipping over quite a few that fall into those categories, but you do have that have cards where you're tacking on an extra card and it changes the nuttiness of the draw and takes away an out. But here we've got a 14-6-0. This is the 120 wrap, the biggest possible wrap. Every one of these boards that falls into this category, the 3 open-ender 6 gut shot board, has 120 wrap possibility. And as I mentioned earlier, there's 65 boards in this group, and therefore there are 65 cases of a 20 wrap hand flop combination. And what you need in order to make a 20 wrap is all of the open enders strung together on one of these boards. So king queen, queen 9, 9-8. Or you could also look at it as 2 completely independent open enders that are both part of your hand. And so it's only possible for the most part with these double gapper hands. Single gappers like Jack 10-8 7 can make a handful of them as well. Jack 10-8 7 is a 20 wrap on Queen 9-6, for example, where it's got these 2 independent open enders, and it also has that double gutter cover, the 10-8. Just like we did with this case, we also have this key 16 out nut wrap where you take the 17 out wrap, add the nut over card. In this case, we take king queen 9 and add the ace, and it turns into a wrap with 1 fewer out than the 17 wrap, but where all the outs are nut. Okay. The next. So anyway, that's the end of wraps. That's the end of wraps on boards where a straight is not possible. Connectedness on boards where a straight is possible. These are the 9 different groups, and I'm actually not going to go through these group by group because there's some similarities to what we talked about before in terms of piecing together open enders and gut shots. It's not necessary to talk about all that, and they really can be broken down into to 3 subgroups. These first 4 are boards in 2 different ways, actually. So I'm going to basically show you how to look at this group of 9 in a couple different ways. The first 4 boards here are boards where 1 straight is possible, and they sort of move from boards where the nuts is completely invulnerable to higher straights, which is only possible when the nuts is Broadway. So you've got ace king queen where jack 10 is the nuts, or ace king jack where queen 10 is the nuts, and so on. These boards are well, I'll get back to talking about the play dynamic on these boards in a second. 1 straight where the nuts is vulnerable to 2 gut shots. So this is the Jack 8-7 type board where you've got the open ender and then only the gut shots. The complete. So the nut straight, no other possible straights, and just these 2 gut shots to beat the draw. Then you've got more vulnerable board where you've got the the middle card is closer to the top. It's the card in between the jack and the 7 is in the middle. So you've got the same single nut straight draw, or sorry, nut straight, and then you've got the over open ender as well. And then you've also got this Jack 10-7 type board where you've got the nuts that's extremely vulnerable, has to fade 2 different open enders and a bunch of gut shots. Now you should be able to see, or if you flip back between this and the slide, I think it's 3 slides before, right here, see the correspondence between the Jack 8-2 board, for example, with 10-9 and the 2 over gut shots, and Jack 8-7 where we've already completed the straight, but we still have the over gut shots to beat it. Jack 9-7, we've already completed the straight with 10-8, but we've got the gut shots to beat the over open ender to beat it with Queen 10. Similarly, Jack 10-7, we've already completed the straight with 9-8, but we've got these 2 over open enders to beat it. So that's the sort of the whole spectrum of vulnerability that can happen. When you have 2 possible straights and 3 possible straights, it's tougher to have an extremely vulnerable nut straight. The main reason is that if you look at, for example, in this extreme case down here, three straights where the nuts is vulnerable to these 2 gut shots. King queen is the nuts on this board, and then you also have 2 other straight draws. Your nut straight is going to be fairly strong if it's on a board where there's two weaker straights already possible, and there just aren't going to be very many other higher straights that could be possible. And so this three straight case is really falls into these two different categories. There's only one example where it's invulnerable. It's Queen Jack 10 only, and all the rest of them boards where there's three cards in a row. It's a relatively invulnerable nut straight. King Queen on Jack 10 9, Queen Jack on 10 9 8, and so on. There's I think about 8 of them total. And then here we've got the boards where there's two possible straights, and the nuts is invulnerable, vulnerable to two gut shots, or vulnerable to the one open ender and two gut shots. But this sort of super vulnerable nut straight can only happen on this board where only one straight is possible, and it's basically where you take those three open enders that can come together on a Jack 10x board, for example, and you make them, so you make the bottom one the nuts, but you still leave all of the other draws available. I want to talk a little bit, stop here and talk about these boards in terms of how they play relative to whether it's proper to call them dry boards, wet boards, etc. In Hold'em, there's any board that has three cards that are close to each other like this is a fairly active board. Boards like Jack 8-7 have a lot of pair plus gut shot combinations. Because there's those draws in people's ranges, people are going to play over pairs sometimes faster on them. If there's flush draw possibilities, more draws are available, and there's all of this sort of interaction between combo draws of the Hold'em variety. So these boards can often be very active, and one of the main reasons that they can be is that 10-9 as a single combination is not that common. The chance of being dealt 10-9 pre-flop, given that these three cards on the board in Hold'em is 16 combinations out of 1,200 or so, so it's a bit over 1%. In PLO, this is again from lesson 3, if the flop is Jack 8-7 and I was dealt a random hand pre-flop, I've got a slightly better than 7% chance that I've got 10-9 in my hand. So the nuts is much more likely to be out there, which means that the fact that nothing really has good equity against the nuts is a lot more important on this type of a board in PLO than it is in Hold'em. Similar things happen on paired boards and on monotone boards. Monotone board in Hold'em is almost always a wet board. There's lots of pair plus flush draw combinations. There's lots of, there's the nut flush draw. There's, all of the sets are strong hands. All of the, like I said, pair hands that have a flush card with them, a flush draw with them are pretty strong hands over pairs with a flush draw and so forth. On these boards, it's all about flushes and then the sets that only have 35% equity against them. On Jack 8-7, it's all about 10-9 and the handful of moderate strength draws that have 30% equity against them, sets basically, or it's it's matching up 10-9 against Queen 10-9 and having the over gut shot redraw to have a few extra outs, or it's Jack 8-7 where you've got a flush draw and 10-9 is bare, and then somebody has Queen 10 with the nut flush draw or something, and those are hands that can compete with the nuts, but there just aren't nearly there aren't nearly that many. There aren't nearly as many of those as there are of sort of the bare nut hands, and so the nuts becomes extremely important on these types of boards, and as a result, representing the nuts can be extremely important. These are the boards that have oftentimes have over multiple streets polarized ranges sort of drawn out. The monotone boards, the naked ace versus naked ace and nut flush against somebody who's calling down with a set or a non-nut flush or whatever. Similarly on this board, representing 10-9 for 3 streets. When you bet the flop and follow through on the turn, for example, it's pretty credible that you have 10-9, and it's also pretty reasonable that your opponent is facing that bet with a hand that is a sort of bluff catcher that it has to face multiple streets, knowing that when you bet the flop with 10-9 on Jack 8-7 rainbow, there's a real good chance you're still going to have the nuts on the river, which gives you the sort of the power of having multiple streets behind your first bet. So a lot of in PLO, a lot of leverage comes from these kind of situations, and being able to represent the nuts over multiple streets on boards where the nuts is not as likely to change as on other boards. And so the upshot of all of this is that this in PLO, Jack 8-7 rainbow is a very dry board. It's a different kind of dry board than you ever get in Hold'em because the nuts is is out there 7% of 7% of the time in a random hand, and more like 10% if it's a popular combination like 10-9 or Jack-10 or whatever. And so there's a real good chance somebody has the nuts, but in terms of the draw possibilities, there's just not that many hands that have good equity against the nuts. And so it can be a board that hits ranges really hard, and at the same time be a board that doesn't have very many draw possibilities. There's actually some terminology that I introduced for this in the book, where I talk about dry versus wet as being a measure of the strength of draws that are possible on a board, how close the equities run together, and heavy versus light being a measure of how hard people's ranges hit the board. So, Queen 9-8 is a board that's dry, but it's also a board that's heavy. It's a board that a lot of times somebody will have Jack-10, a lot of times somebody will have a set of queens, set of nines, and so forth. But what's interesting at the top end, there's a wide range of hands, and there's 20% of all hands hit that board hard, but the matchups between the nut hands and the near nut hands, and then the rest of the hands beyond the near nut hands, are more polarizing on these boards, as opposed to on a board like Jack-10-7 with a flush draw, where I could turn over 9-8 and not intimidate you at all. I can't represent 9-8 over multiple streets. I'm not going to have the nuts on practically any turn cards, let alone by the river. And so there's this much different equity situation where there's so many hands that are strong against the nuts on a board like this, even when it's rainbow. The big wraps, King-Queen-9 and Ace-King-Queen-9, are favored over 9-8, just straight up 60-40 favorites, regardless of if there's a flush draw possibility. And so, like I said, there really are and plenty of combo hands, sets plus open ender, top two plus open ender. King, Queen, Jack 10 on this board is, I believe, a slight favorite against 9-8. It's really close. There's just a ton of hands that wouldn't care if 9-8 is a big part of your range. Those hands do not exist on these boards. And so the power of representing the nuts, having a range that's polarized, and then sort of the difficulties of facing a polarized range, all those things apply on these types of boards, and it's very different, these types of boards. So going from 1 to 4, we really are going from static dry type boards to wet dynamic type boards, especially obviously when you add flush draws to these, or when you make these rainbow. And then you can sort of see these 1 through 4, 5 through 7, and 8 and 9 sort of grouped together and matching up with each other. 1, 5, and 8 are grouped together, all the boards where the nuts is invulnerable to higher straights. 2, 6, and 9 are all somewhat similar to each other. I mean, the non-nut straights on any of these boards, second and third, the boards where 2 and 3 straights are possible, are very often among the weakest hands at the top end of the hierarchy, because they just do so terribly against the nuts. For example, on a board like this board, Jack-10-8, there's so many overwrap hands that you would much rather have than 9-7, even though 9-7 is technically favored against some of those hands because of how poorly it does against the nuts, and how well Ace-King-Queen does against the nuts. You would absolutely rather have Ace-King-Queen, and so adding the extra possible straight doesn't necessarily change the dynamic very much, because what we're mostly focused in on is the number of draws to beat the nuts, and certainly you have on all of these boards, you're always going to have set draws to beat the nuts that have 35-ish% equity, and you're draw to make a full house, and you've also got on many of them flush draws and backdoor flush draws, which come into play. All right, that is actually the end of the talking about connectedness, and we're nearly an hour into the video. I'm guessing that we're going to go another 20 minutes, so it'll probably be a little bit longer than an hour. But there's not a ton more to say. Most of the categorization stuff happens in those in that connectedness discussion, and we've along the way I've talked a little bit about suitedness. Obviously, a board that has a flush draw possibility is going to be much wetter, much more dynamic, active, whatever term you want to use to describe it. A lot more action is going to go in because there's this whole other set of draws, and it becomes really important if you have really any hand strength, whether it be a connectedness hand or a high card strength hand, pair, 2-pair, a 13-out wrap. On a rainbow board, the backdoor flush draws play a very minor role in making sort of strengthening or weakening certain variations, and what matters a lot more is usually going to be the nature of your connectedness hand, whether it's nut or not, whether your set is top set, middle set, or bottom set, those sorts of things, whether they you have some kind of pair plus straight draw combination on those rainbow boards. And suits don't really come into play very much. Obviously, on suited boards, you take all of those strong hands on hands that are strong hands on rainbow boards, and you fork them into two different columns. If you have a flush draw with them, they are very strong. If you have no flush draw with them, they are significantly weaker. Talked about this a little bit in the equity matchup lesson number 4, where a 17 wrap on a rainbow board, sort of if you put that onto a flush draw board, it's kind of equivalent to a 17 wrap on a flush draw board is about as valuable as a 13 wrap on a rainbow board. That's sort of a shifting of the scale. Okay, that said, if we're just trying to sort of put things into categories, obviously, like I said, the equity matchups and the relative hand strength hierarchies and so on are very different on suited boards and rainbow boards, but it's pretty easy to categorize them to recognize a rainbow board versus a suited board. There's only 3 total possibilities. As I said, monotone boards are sort of their own unique thing, and really all of the action immediately centers around flushes and made hands that have the chance of beating flushes, primarily sets. On boards that don't have many straight draw possibilities, you can sometimes float comfortably or put in a street or two of action comfortably with like top 2, knowing that if you happen to be up against a flush, you at least have a couple outs. You can sometimes do something with straight draws on those boards depending on the exact circumstances, but for the most part you're almost exclusively looking at sets and flushes, which makes them a very peculiar type of polarized board, especially because 20% of all hands are going to flop a flush. The chance that a random hand flops a flush on a monotone board is like 20%. So there's going to be a good chance in a multi-way pot someone has a weak flush, someone has a stronger flush, or you've got medium flush versus set, nut flush versus set, nut flush versus low flush. A lot of these matchups are going to happen, and so the dynamic is really defined just by those two types of hands. There's it's not like in Hold'em where there's a very low chance that somebody flopped a flush, so all of those combo draw hands are worth something. And plus you've got this PLO thing where you have to use 2 cards. So having one, the nut spade in your hand doesn't give you a draw, it just gives you a blocker. Anyway, should move on beyond talking about monotone boards and talk about the impact of rank categories. It is possible, and I've played around with this and have something like this in the book, to create a bunch of categories based on like the number of Broadway cards. 2 Broadway cards and 1 middle card is one category. 2 Broadway cards and 1 wheel card is another. There's actually more categories than in the connectedness stuff, and they're a lot less valuable to talk about. It's more important to talk about some general themes and connect the rank nature of boards to what we were talking about through the connectedness stuff in the first 45 minutes or so. And here's going to be sort of, I think, already talked about connectedness with respect to suitedness. I hope that adding this discussion on this slide here is going to give a picture of sort of how different boards that fall into the same connectedness category are both similar to each other in terms of the straight draws that are possible, and also are significantly different because of the high card nature of the board, because of whether the board is going to be set heavy or pair plus draw heavy and so on. So anyway, we're going to not do a big categorization scheme and just talk about some general themes. The first point to make is that out of the paired hands and unpaired hands, there is, generally speaking, a bigger difference between the VPIPs that people have with pocket pairs, from the top, kings, queens, aces, kings, queens, jacks, Broadway pairs, to the lower pairs. There's a pretty quick and steep drop off between the frequency that people play pocket queens, where they're almost always going to set mine, and the frequency that people are playing 9s, 8s, 7s, and so on, the hands that make sets on middle cards, on boards that are middle card heavy and so on. That drop off is significantly stronger than the drop off among unpaired hands. There is a slightly greater chance that people are playing 3-card hands with a dangler that are 3-card Broadway hands with a dangler than that they're playing the Jack 10-9 X with a dangler. King, Queen, Jack X is probably a little bit heavier in people's ranges, but not by much. Where you really see a significant drop-off is when you're looking at 2 and 3 card combinations in the wheel card range. So 5, 4, 3X and so on are going to be a lot less common in people's ranges. People that have a good 3 card combination plus a low dangler, they're going to play those hands, but they're not as likely to play King, Queen, 4, 5 as they are to play King, Queen, 9, 7, stuff like that. The middle cards are a lot closer in terms of VPIP to the high cards in the unpaired hand case than in the paired hand case. The impact of this is that sets are a much bigger factor on Broadway boards. There's also this comment about overpair possibilities on a board like Ace XX. All of the pocket pairs that didn't flop a set are worthless. On Jack XX, obviously, there's a lot of overpair combinations, including overpair plus draw combinations that are significantly valuable. Sets are a much bigger factor on Broadway boards. The hierarchy of 1 pair hands is more important on middle and low boards. I want to change this. Actually, I found out that I can edit in video. I'm going to say this is what I should have had them right. Pair plus draw hands. So what I really want to focus in on here is that a bare 1 pair hand is never going to be worth much in PLO. But if you look at a board like, I don't know, Jack 8-2, there's going to be a lot fewer combinations of sets than on a board like Ace Queen 9. And I chose those 2 boards for a reason. Ace Queen 9 and Jack 8-2 both fall into the same connectedness category. They both have one possible open ender. They both have the gut shots that go with it. They both have a nut 13 wrap and a non-nut 13 wrap. And if you wanted to, you could list out the full correspondence between every single kind of straight draw those boards have. But they're still going to play differently. And the main reason that they play differently is that Ace Queen 9 has lots of sets and top 2 hands that are invulnerable. Set of aces, set of queens are obviously very common in people's ranges. Sets of 9s are much more common as a bottom set than a set of 2s or 3s or whatever, relatively speaking. And as a result, those boards are going to have a lot more of the hands that the draws are doing poorly against, particularly that the sort of medium strength weak combo hand draws are doing poorly against. If you have a hand like Queen Queen 10X on Jack 8-2, the couple of hands you don't want to see when you have an overpair and a gut shot are sets. You don't want to see a set of jacks. You don't want to see a set of 8s, and you don't want to see a set of 2s. Any set on that board has you in a lot of trouble. You only got 6 outs, the 4 gut shut outs and the 2 set outs. But if you're up against a range that includes a bunch of 1 pair hands like Jack 10 9 7, you actually dominate some of those hands and have really good equity against the ones, you're coin flipping against a lot of them and you're dominating some of them. And so those hands can have a lot more value on that board. Can't get into a whole lot of strategy discussion as far as like which hands to play in which ways, which hands to float and which hands to stack off and what SPRs you need to have to stack off. That's all stuff for post-flop theory discussion. But there's a couple general points you can make about that dynamic on those boards. As you go from the sort of least connected to most connected boards and you add the possibility of a flush draw, obviously, you're going from boards that are really static, that have equity matchups where there's not much that has strong equity against the nuts, whether this be a board like Ace King 6 Rainbow or Jack 8-7 Rainbow, all these boards that just don't have hands with strong equity against the nuts. And you move further right over to boards like I guess down the list on the connectedness chart, to move back up here all the way. As we look at this list and we move down from King 8-2, Ace King 6, Ace King 7, Jack 8-2, Ace 10-7, 9, Jack 9-2, Jack 10-2, 10-9-4, those kind of boards, especially with a flush draw, we're going from boards that have hands that have, or the nuts is a combination that very few hands have good equity against, to boards where the nuts is just one of many hands that have a lot of equity against each other. So Jack 10-6 with a flush draw, a set of jacks is obviously doing pretty well, but the fact that it dominates a set of tens is not, that's not the whole range that it's facing. Whereas, ace, king, six, rainbow, if you've got a set of aces, the next strongest hand is one that you completely crush. The next strongest hand versus range on jack 10 6 with a flush draw, there's 20 of them, and they're all big combo draws and all this stuff. And then that means that a set of tens runs closer versus a range than a set of jacks does. A set of tens is going to be against that range is going to be not that much worse off than a set of jacks, because there's so many hands that they do similarly against. There's obviously dominating draws, medium strength draws, weak draws, and the wetter the board gets, the more important this hierarchy of pair plus draw combinations is, making sure that you're at the top end of the multiple component hands, whether it be two pair plus an open ender, not having bare two pair but having extra equity with your two pair, not having bare bottom set but having extra equity with it, not having a bare wrap on a board where there's all kinds of set plus flush draw combination type hands that have you crushed, but having a wrap plus a pair or a wrap plus a flush draw. These things are really important on those boards. Within these categories as well, again, we're going to focus in on this one open-ender, four gut check category. So we see Jack 8-2 as an example. Ace Queen 9 is an example of a board like this. King Queen 2 is an example of a board like this. And to get back to the rank points here, the further down that list you go, from high card board to low card board, the lower the importance of sets, the higher the importance of these pair plus combinations. And even on a rainbow board without that many straight draws, like Jack 8-2 rainbow or 10-7-2 rainbow, it's still the case that the nuts is a combination that not many hands have a lot of equity against, relatively speaking, compared to the really wet boards. But the nuts is out there less often, and so in terms of the amount of action that people could be willing to put in with sort of medium strength hands, there's a ton of pair plus draw combinations that can be more aggressive because they aren't worried about being up against a lot of sets, and sort of that makes these boards play a little bit. They're not wet; they just play a little bit sort of more dynamically. They have a list of hands that are sort of pretty good, that run closer in equities together and are relevant. Whereas on a board like King Queen 2, where you've got sets of kings, sets of queens, King Queen, there's a lot of combinations of those strong hands that a gut shot and an overpair is doing pretty badly against. Whereas on a lower board like 10-7-2, all of those pair plus draw combo hands are doing pretty well, and so the equity matchups run closer together. There's a lot of impacts to this. Sometimes people play those boards really sort of shut down, get to showdown. They don't get aggressive with one pair hands because that's not what they do. There's other dynamics between aggressive players where these boards shift a lot, and especially if you had a flush draw to them, a board like 10-6-2 with a flush draw, even though it's a board that doesn't have very many straight draw possibilities, it often will play between aggressive opponents, will play really, people will be getting stacks in with hands that are sort of weaker in absolute terms than they would be willing to get stacks in with on boards that hit ranges harder. But you'll be seeing a lot of combo, overcards plus gut shot plus flush draw kind of hands being willing to be aggressive among tough players. Okay, I'm going to move on now and talk briefly about paired boards. We've talked a little bit about monotone boards and these sort of Jack 8-7 type straight boards where the nuts is invulnerable on the flop relatively and is pretty likely to still be the nuts by the river, that those boards play in a certain way. Paired boards fall into that group as well. The chance of flopping trips on a paired board with a random hand is somewhere in the trips or better, trips or the full house, is somewhere in the 18% range. It's like 12% chance you flop bare trips and like 3% chance for each type of full house, the unpaired card or pocket pair full house. And so you're in this similar situation as you are on monotone boards where there's a strong type of hand that is about a 20% chance somebody has it. And then there's a hierarchy within those that's oftentimes fairly rigid. Obviously in the flush case, you've got nut flush always, nut flush is got all the other flushes drawn dead. Every flush has the flush that's better than it drawing dead, or drawing dead to the flushes that are better than it has the flush that it's better than drawing dead. And so this kind of shuts down action in a lot of cases when people have medium strength hands. Similar things happen on paired boards, but they happen much more so on one type of paired board than another, and that's the distinction that I want to draw here. Jack Jack 9 versus Jack 9 9. Main factors that define the texture of a paired board are which card is paired and whether the unpaired card is higher or lower than the paired card. This is the first point, and this is actually the most important of the two. On a board like Jack 9 9, where the unpaired card is higher than the pair, there is one hand that has everything else crushed. And it's actually oftentimes a very likely hand. Set of jacks, set of queens, set of kings on these King XX boards, so on. They are pretty highly weighted in people's ranges, and they're 95-5 against trips. They have them completely crushed. On the other hand, if you flip the board and make it Jack Jack 9, the underfull only has 55-ish equity, 58 I think it is, equity against trips with no cards blocked. So 10 basically, if you have Jack XXX against pocket nines on the Jack Jack 9 board, you've got 10 pure outs twice. You can pair any of your cards, and you can also obviously catch the case Jack. So those 10 pure outs twice works out to low 40s. It's like 42. Obviously, when there is no dominating hand at the top of the hierarchy, it sort of ripples down through the rest of the matchups. Given that he knows he could be up, he knows that worst case scenario is that he's up against Jack 9 or pocket nines, and he's a guy with Ace King Queen Jack is going to be able to be more aggressive. Given that, say on a board like Jack Jack 5, Jack Jack 4, which is even more this example is even stronger on those types of boards. Someone like someone with Jack, with a good Jack, Ace Jack, might look at that and say, worst case scenario, I run into a full house, no big deal. I've got 40% equity. All my cards are live. And then the person with Jack 9 8 7 recognizes this and thinks, well, even though I don't really do well against anything, I at least am not in terrible shape against this guy who's got bare trips and is getting it in. I got to hit my kickers, he's got to hit his or whatever. And oftentimes, at some point in this thought process, you run into somebody who's making an incorrect decision, somebody who's not recognizing that their hand strength just isn't good enough to be aggressive on this board, because they're the ones getting it in with the weak version of the weaker hand in the hierarchy. You can draw an analogy actually to the really wet boards like Jack 10 6 with a flush draw. Pocket jacks is obviously going to get it in. All these combo draws that do fine against pocket jacks are going to get it in, and then a set of tens is going to say, well, I can get it in because all the combo draws. And then somebody else is going to be sitting on the sideline with bare bottom set or with a really ugly under combo draw like 9 8 7 with no flush draw or whatever. And at some point you're below some threshold where now you're the one giving money to everybody else, because you're sort of falsely justifying it to yourself. A really weak jack might be in that position on this Jack Jack 9 board, but the point for this lesson is that as a result of the fact that we sort of start with this 60-40 type matchup as opposed to a 95-5 matchup among the strong hands, among that top 20%, those boards are going to play a lot more aggressively. A board like Jack Jack 5, Queen 5 5, even Ace 5 has to be really cautious, because the main hand that an opponent might be representing to want to play for stacks is a hand that has it absolutely crushed. And having the other fives outkicked is not nearly as important as the fact that both you and the other fives have to be scared of the one hand that has any trips crushed. And so that causes those boards to play much more passively. It also means that the hand that's currently ahead has more incentive to slow play, because it knows that if it can induce more action from trips by only calling the flop, let the trips fill up and then get stacks in once the trips has a full house, so on. Those considerations slow the action down a lot. And so you get these two different types of boards. That's actually going to have to wrap it up now. Video's been going on for an hour 15. I think I made all the points that I wanted to. Obviously did not get into a ton of actual post-flop play examples. That wasn't really. I mean, that's not the point of volume 1 of my book. It's all this theoretical foundation stuff, and therefore, because this series has evolved into this extension of volume 1 of my book, was not really the point of this video. I hope you could pull some things from the play dynamic stuff that I did talk about in terms of sort of just some theory points to think about when you see a board texture. But the main thing I wanted to get across is the idea of looking at board textures through these 3 different lenses: understanding the connectedness possibilities, understanding the suitedness possibilities, understanding the likelihood of sets and one pair combo hand type, the relative likelihoods of the different high card strength combinations, and then sort of how to put them together into a picture of how the board is going to play. And then the question of what to do with specific hands within that is the question that we didn't get to, and it's sort of it's for for a post-flop theory series, which is would be based on the second volume of my book, and is not going to be done on Pokersavvy, because I'm obviously moving on after this video. So that's that. Again, I'll say that I really appreciate everybody's comments all the way through the 1.5 years on my videos. I feel like this has been a successful experience, and I'm glad that I've been here for 1.5 years. So I hope again, I hope you got a lot out of this, and I hope that closing with these 3 videos was a nice. I think it was a nice way to go out. I think I put out a good amount of good information. Some of the stuff I've been working on pretty hard over the last year, and I really wanted to leave that for the Pokersavvy community. And I know that people have been asking for these videos for a while. So with that, I'm out.